Hello, I'm Kevyn Berger. Tonight on KTCA Reports, we explore a health problem that's been called a silent killer, lead poisoning. Our focus will be the poisoning's effects on kids who are at the highest risk, and you might be surprised who they are. And before we leave tonight, you'll know what you can do to prevent the problem. That's our topic tonight on KTCA Reports.
Major funding for this edition of KTCA Reports is provided by the McKnight Foundation, responding to the needs of individuals and communities. Additional funding is provided by Ryder, Bennett, Egan, and Arundel, providing timely, aggressive, and cost-effective legal services.
Tonight we hope to dispel some myths about kids and lead poisoning and give you a better understanding of the severity of the problem. One myth is that lead poisoning is only a problem for kids who live in old inner-city housing. Not true. Any house at least 13 years old probably has lead-based paint on interior and exterior walls and trim. That means 90% of all Minneapolis houses and 80% of the housing in St. Paul has lead-based paint. The percentages are the same for houses in most suburbs. Now, neither Minneapolis nor St. Paul screen the majority of their children for lead poisoning, and officials believe the number of cases per year in the Twin Cities and Duluth would exceed 900 if all children were tested. But not all cases in children under age 6 are going undetected. Reporter Maureen Willenbring has the story of one St. Paul family getting help.
Rose Turner has lived at this rented house in East St. Paul for 3 years. She never knew her 4 children could be playing in a poison trap. 2-year-old Danielle has had blood tests through the St. Paul Health Department that show her body has dangerously high lead levels. Her older sisters, Ashley, who's 6, and Lindsay, who's 3, also have lead levels high enough to begin destroying brain cells and causing learning disabilities. Only their baby brother Jacob had lead levels that weren't alarmingly high. Rose believes her children are getting doses of lead from somewhere in or around the house.
It could be chipping paint or cracked paint. Could be old toys. You know, if they chew on things like paper that is printed, it contains lead. Some color crayons contain lead. It's in the air. It's just in the air, too.
To pinpoint where the kids could be getting lead poisoning, St. Paul Public Health nurse Lynn Batham made a house call.
Primarily we analyze lead-based paint, but we also will take soil samples, water samples, or dust samples. Usually I can walk into a house and go to the windowsill and see where the paint is chipping and peeling, and oftentimes the paint that you find in the window tract area is exterior paint.
Tiny pieces of that lead-tainted paint could spread to inside and outside the house.
It's mostly that dust or the chips getting on their hands or in playthings, and then them inadvertently ingesting it.
Paint samples from the Turner's house are being tested at the St. Paul Health Department's lab. But while awaiting the results, Rose has made a decision.
I'd like to move now. Well, I kind of wanted to move anyway because we just need a bigger place. But now even more so.
If the house has lead paint, the landlord will be ordered to replace it with non-lead paint. If the bare dirt beside the house has lead, that too must be replaced and planted with grass.
Lynn, how come we don't like you to play here no more? Because there's no grass, huh?
No.
Only dirt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Remember what Mom tell you all the time?
Grass over there.
Rose has the kids wash their hands more often to keep them from eating lead dust. And she says she house cleans with water mixed with a chemical that picks up lead dust.
I just like to get things taken care of, you know. I mean, I don't want kids that, you know, have a learning disability as, you know, they get into school.
Joining us with more on the Turner family's battle with lead is St. Paul Public Health nurse Lynn Batham. Welcome, Lynn. You tell us that you just got the test results from that house that we saw, the Turner home, today. What does it show?
It shows that the majority of the lead-based paint is indeed on the exterior of the house, but we also found some lead-based paint in the kitchen. All the paint in the kitchen area has lead-based paint.
And you told me that even the picnic table outside.
The picnic table has it, the legs of the picnic table. And I suspect that when the children ate at the picnic table
Right.
this summer, they didn't always keep the food on the plate. So I'm sure that they picked up some of that dust.
So it's a pretty good guess that this is where their problem is coming from.
Yes.
Now we have a map that shows some of the documented cases around the Twin Cities where where there have been cases where children and homes where lead has been a problem. Now this is showing a lot of center city in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. Is that what you see?
Yes. That is primarily where we do see cases. Primarily in St. Paul, it would be in the Frogtown, Thomasdale area, and some in the east side, more near east side, and then in the Minneapolis area, the
Phillips and near north is where we're
Right.
seeing that.
Right.
We'll be talking more about specific places in the Twin Cities where lead's a problem, and Lynn will continue our discussion in just a few moments. Now, the most recent survey of lead concentrations in soil around the Twin Cities looks like this. The darker the area, the higher the lead level. This study found the highest lead concentrations overall in soil and dust samples collected near houses. The dirt immediately around steps, a popular play area for children, had the highest levels of all. Not surprisingly, painted houses had more lead in the soil than houses made of brick, stone, or stucco. Those are some of the facts regarding lead in the Twin Cities. For a national perspective on the problem, we turn to this report produced by Connecticut Public Television and Consumers Union. It's hosted by Arthur Ashe. We'll answer your phoned-in questions about kids and lead poisoning after the documentary.
Hello, I'm Arthur Ashe, and this is a program about our children and the #1 environmental threat to their health, lead poisoning. Lead is a highly toxic poison. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you may not even know you've touched it. But it's found everywhere in our environment, and it doesn't go away. It's found most often in old paint, in soil near busy roads, and in our drinking water. Too much exposure to lead can permanently damage children, robbing them of their full potential very early on. But fortunately, this program is about how you can prevent lead poisoning in the first place, what you and your family can do to protect yourselves, what we as a society need to do to safeguard all of our children.
I can't go on the bus.
Jessica Tackling is 4, and Nicholas is going on 2, and they've been poisoned by lead. It happened in their house in New London, Connecticut. A new baby was on the way, and their father was doing renovations. He didn't know that there was lead in the old layers of paint he was removing throughout the 80-year-old house.
He had been doing work ever since we moved into the house, but it didn't occur to us anything was wrong until there'd be a day that they would go without eating at all, just crying all day long, just not knowing what was wrong with them. Doctors would say they were fine.
What I did is I just repainted the upper part of the wall, and the lower half we had all wood, and then I scraped the wood and sanded, and then I repainted that.
It was just April of this year that I found a pamphlet on lead poisoning symptoms, and I read it, and I knew that was what was wrong with my children, because there were every symptom that my son had, and some that my daughter had, and a lot of them that my husband had. And even some of them I was feeling. I called the doctor right away and asked for lead poisoning tests for my kids and myself because I'm pregnant right away. The health department received the results, I believe, before I did, and then the doctors received them and told us, you need to leave the home.
After we left the hospital, we couldn't even come back here. It was like, leave everything behind. I came in to get a few things that we needed, but the kids couldn't come back to their toys. We couldn't come back, to live, sleep. We had to leave all our clothes behind the time being. There's still a lot of stuff here that we have to leave.
I don't know if lead poisoning has taken anything away from them. I want learning to be fun and easy for them, a challenge, but not such a challenge that they just can't do it because of something that's damaged their brain.
The Tacklings, like millions of other families, are victims of an epidemic that knows no class boundaries. Middle and upper income families have lead in their homes, so do low income families. People who own their own homes, like the Tacklings, can have just as serious a lead problem as those who don't. How big is the lead problem? Karen Florini of the Environmental Defense Fund is an expert.
There are a lot of myths that now exist about lead poisoning. One is that it's only a problem in urban areas and only a problem of poor people. Both those myths are just plain wrong. Lead poisoning affects every sector of American life, every geographic region. Lead poisoning is a problem in big towns, small towns, rural areas. Lead poisoning is a problem wherever lead is found.
Fact. More than 1 out of every 6 preschool children has dangerously high levels of lead. That's over 3 million children nationwide. Fact. Lead poisoning is more common than whooping cough, mumps, and measles.
5-year-old Rashir Graves was hospitalized for dangerously high levels of lead in her blood. She and her family live in Washington, D.C.
She was exposed to lead because I was refurbishing the house, and I scraped the paint off the wall, off the woodwork. By scraping the paint, you create a lead dust. That's where I guess basically the problem started. My daughter had a blood lead evaluation in school from being in kindergarten, and we caught it early. When they discovered it at the highest point, she wasn't sick or anything. She was very active, as she always was, and running and playing. That was the surprising thing, that she had no headaches, but she didn't have any of those symptoms.
Lead poisoning has been called a silent epidemic. Spotting the symptoms is often impossible. Dr. John Rosen is a leading medical authority.
If a child is symptomatic, which again is a very rare instance these days, the symptoms themselves are nonspecific and can mimic many other diseases in the pediatric age group.
When I told my pediatrician that my daughter was complaining about stomach aches, my son was real irritable. We just kept thinking it was just colic. He was just an irritable baby that didn't like to sit still.
Fact. Most lead-poisoned children have no symptoms. Those that do can be difficult to diagnose.
In many cases, the main source of lead poisoning is the dust that's created when layers of old lead-based paint inside are removed. But the lead dust from old paint can be outside, too, as the Draper family of Stamford, Connecticut found out.
We bought the house in 1985, and about 3 or 4 years later, we started stripping the wood trim around the house, which hadn't been painted according to our neighbors for about 20 years, and it was peeling and in pretty bad shape. So we realized that we had to remove most of the paint. During that process, a lot of the paint fell down into the dirt. So I took a sample of it and I mailed it to a lab, and there was lead in the paint. I mentioned it to our pediatrician and asked whether he thought she should be tested. He said that he didn't think so in view of the fact that we had moved out of the house and the way it had been done. So she wasn't tested. However, when she was 12 months old, as a routine matter, they did test her. And the initial test that they did came back with an elevated lead level. We were told by our pediatrician that if the second test came back showing an elevated lead level, she'd have to be hospitalized. The health department came in and took samples, probably 40 or 50 samples. They tested our water, they tested dust, they collected dust from the air with an air pump. They took paint samples of paint that's in the house now. They tested the dirt. When the results came back, they showed that on the side of the house where we are, the lead level in the dirt was 14 times the safe maximum. On the other sides of the house, it was about 4 to 9 times the safe maximum. So at that point, we had to figure out what we were going to do about it. The health department recommended that we remove the dirt. It took 3 trucks to remove it. Then we purchased 18 cubic yards of a artificial soil mixture, and we are in the process now of replacing the dirt that we removed. I would never let my daughter outside without doing it, and I would not sell this house to anyone else without doing it.
Lead can get into the soil from another source. For decades, most gasoline contained lead, and that lead from car exhaust contaminated yards and playgrounds near busy roads.
Fact. It is estimated that 11 million young children could be exposed to soil with too much lead.
Besides the soil, another major source of lead can be your drinking water, as the Chardulo family in New Rochelle, New York, discovered.
We had already been told when we bought the house that we had a lead line, so we had the plumber change lots of pipes to copper. The water company told us that if we let the water run every morning, that it would be fine, that the level would reach the level you're supposed to have. So we were running the water every morning, believing that it was safe and it was fine. But apparently that's not enough. I decided to switch pediatricians, and this new pediatrician does lead tests. She called me up and she told me, we think it's a mistake. Bring her in, we'll do it again. And it wasn't a mistake. They found that her level was so high that they had to report it to Albany, and that's where it all started. We immediately went to bottled water because we had already known from the water company that we had this lead line. And we still can't drink the water because we had a private contractor come and test the water. We also had the Board of Health come and test our water, and we were told that there's still lead in our water. I will not give my daughter the water because I don't want any of it in her system.
Fact. An estimated 10 million young children drink water that may contain too much lead.
For children, no matter what the source of lead, drinking water, soil around the house, old paint dust inside, or some other source, all lead exposure adds up. It can create serious health problems, more serious than medical experts once thought.
Lead produces numerous short circuits in the brain, which, in a sense, disrupt the normal activity of the brain in terms of integrating brain function so that children can learn appropriately in school. And the irreversible effects that appear to be apparent in children, mainly when they reach school age, are deficits in spelling, reading, writing, concentrating, abstract thinking, really all the essential skills that are necessary for success in academic life. It's very clear, whatever the exact mechanism of lead's toxicity on the growing central nervous system, that the younger the central nervous system happens to be, the more vulnerable that it is. So that the normal mobile routines of a toddler are to explore the environment, to get into the environment with toys, with their clothes, with their hands, and normal hand-to-mouth activity in such an environment which is contaminated and polluted with lead will pervade every aspect of a toddler's environment.
Even the developing fetus is at risk. Dr. Herbert Needleman has conducted important research.
Lead goes across the placenta, and it's transferred from the mother's bloodstream to the baby's. During the time when cells are developing, brain cells, which is in the mother's uterus and for months afterwards, those cells are more susceptible to toxic influences. And so fetuses do have increased vulnerability to lead. And we have shown that umbilical cord blood lead levels, that's the baby's lead at birth, are related to later IQ scores.
Fact. There is no cure for lead poisoning. Damage already done to the growing child or the fetus may be irreversible. Fact. The toxic effects of lead are cumulative. Small doses, the size of a few grains of sugar, can add up to severe poisoning.
Small doses of lead are so hazardous that public health officials have now redefined what is considered to be harmful.
The federal government's recommendations now indicate that a blood lead level below 10 should be viewed as acceptable. Again, that doesn't mean there are no effects at lead levels below 10, but it means that we can currently identify significant effects beginning above 10.
The more we learn about lead, the more we find effects in lower and lower doses. The lower the doses that are defined as toxic, the more children are affected.
Fact. Most experts now recommend that all children under 6 be tested for lead.
How do you have your child tested for lead poisoning? Well, there are a few steps you should take.
Virtually every state should have, through its own local Department of Health and local Department of Health satellites, a facility where a child's blood lead can be measured, or at least taken and sent to a state laboratory, and then measured with reasonably quick feedback as to what the blood lead concentration is. It's absolutely necessary for parents to become educated so that they can demand that their children be tested by their pediatrician if they happen to see a private pediatrician.
So that's how it all started, with switching pediatricians. Which makes you worry. If I had not switched pediatricians, I would have been continuing to give her the water, and I would have never known. Because a lot of pediatricians do not test for lead.
Pediatricians do not, in general, believe that it's a problem for the middle class. And they're wrong. The data is there, and the data has been published and will be brought more forcibly to their attention.
In getting a child tested for lead levels, it's very important to actually measure the amount of lead in the blood.
Fact: a blood sample taken from the vein is necessary for an accurate test. It costs about $30.
A child in a relatively low-risk category should be screened at 12 months and again at 24 months to ensure that the blood lead value has peaked or is not continuing to rise.
Other children who have high-risk settings in their life, for example, they live in old housing that's in deteriorating condition, or their home is being renovated, they need to be tested more often.
Children who have dangerously high lead levels may receive special medical treatment called chelation therapy. It can be painful. 2.5-year-old Jesse Keese received chelation therapy at a hospital in New York City.
Yeah, I think it was very, very painful because he was crying and he wouldn't move. He just lay there, and when I picked him up, they would tell me I could hold him, and I would hold him, and he would cry, and I couldn't leave him because he didn't want me to leave him. So it was very painful for him.
What chelating agents actually do is they sponge up lead, they grab onto lead from various organs in a child's body, and then excrete that lead through the urinary tract far faster than a child could normally excrete lead on his or her own.
She was in the hospital for a week, and all they did was fed her, a lot of fluids flushing the system, and that brought her lead levels down quite a bit. Long-terming right now, we're still checking to make sure that she'll be okay, and it'll be that way, I guess, for the next couple of years.
If blood tests show your child's lead level is high, you've got to find the sources of lead in your child's environment and remove them. Dr. Andrew McBride heads the Stamford, Connecticut Health Department and advises many families.
We have to look at the child's environment, but it also might mean looking at not only their homes, but it might be looking at the babysitter's home, the daycare, places where they might, a neighbor's house where they might be spending a lot of time. So it involves a full investigation. Anyone who is in a house that's 15 or 20 years old should assume that the paint there is lead paint, until proven otherwise.
Fact: 3 million tons of old lead paint line the walls of 57 million American homes. That's more than 100 pounds per home.
The owners of this house, built in the 1950s, were concerned about lead because they were planning to remodel. They consulted with Dr. McBride.
This older house represents has some of the hazards that are typical of older homes. Here you see the wood siding, which is often peeling and flaking. There's a little flaking here. And here you see lead paint chips here that are peeling and often fall to the ground and cause a problem with the soil. Often older homes have shutters that are painted with lead paint. The trim inside the windows is often coated with lead paint. Doorways and entrances are often a problem. The door itself and some of the step boards are painted with lead. Sandboxes are another real hazard around the house. Often sand is purchased from construction sites, and this construction sand can be contaminated with lead. Houses that have problems on the outside often have lead problems on the inside. Probably our single biggest hazards in homes is the windowsills. They're at the level where children can have easy access to these windows and thus access to the lead. Ceilings might have lead in older homes, but if the paint is intact, it doesn't offer a problem. But if there's moisture problems, it's best then to remedy the situation definitively, and mostly that's by covering up.
Besides consulting your local health department, there are tests you can do yourself in your own home to find lead hazards. Dr. Edward Groth is an environmental scientist at the product testing laboratories of Consumer Reports.
To find out whether there's lead in your home, for instance in paint or in ceramics or solder on the plumbing system, you need to get those surfaces tested to find out their lead content. Now you can have a commercial lab come out and do those tests in your home for you, but it's often hard to find a lab that can do the work, and it may be quite expensive. There are also do-it-yourself kits that consumers can use to do those tests themselves. One of them is the Instant Lead Testing Kit from Lead Check. The other is the Frandon Lead Alert Kit from the Frandon Company. They're easy to use. They give you results in up to a half an hour. If you do find you have lead paint in the house, then chemical strippers are the best way to remove that paint. The peel-away product was our top-rated stripper. It's got safe chemicals in it, and it works most effectively. The 3M product, Safest Stripper, is also quite effective and contains a safe stripper ingredient. Either one of those could be used to strip about the amount on a door. Now, if the problem is lead in your drinking water, or you want to find out if there's lead in your drinking water, sometimes you can get your water utility to do the testing for you. You can also go to a commercial laboratory. There are several such labs in the country which provide nationwide mail-order service. Consumer Reports has tested 4 of these companies and found that they provide reliable, accurate testing. Suburban Water Testing in Temple, Pennsylvania, the Water Check Company, which is in Cleveland, Ohio, Water Test Company, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire, and this is the Lead Check Water Test Kit from Applied Technical Systems in Marietta, Georgia. If the tests show that your water has a moderately elevated lead level, you can reduce that to a safe level by using a tabletop filter like this Omni, which contains a special cartridge designed to remove heavy metals. Now, there may be a problem also with lead in the soil around the outside of your house. That's much harder to test for because soil testing has got to be systematic. It involves many samples. You would need to get a commercial lab to do that. So it's probably best to assume that there may be lead in the soil and to keep the children away from the soil. Make sure the grass covers all the bare dirt areas in the yard.
While there's a lot you can do yourself to reduce lead hazards, there are some things you shouldn't do.
A child generally should not be present in a home while any kind of lead abatement activity is being undertaken.
Well, I would recommend above all that you not de-lead a house in the presence of a pregnant woman. Let me put it another way. If you're going to do anything about repairing a house, sanding or scraping, any pregnant women should be out of that environment.
Where there's a hazard identified, our principles are take it out or cover it up. That's the best principles in dealing with lead abatement.
Play it safe. Act as if every paint surface in your house has lead paint on it. And don't use removal techniques that will create a lead hazard. You should not use a sander, for instance, to remove paint.
Now, actually, after I learned that after I had x-rays done on the wall, that there's actually lead still soaked into the wood itself, that if I took the sander now and sanded, the dust that's given off by the sander, the wood dust, is actually lead dust.
The sander will create an enormous amount of dust and spread it throughout the household. You shouldn't use a heat gun on paint that may contain lead, because that also tends to create a lot of dust and small particles.
What it does, it heats up all the paint right to the wood and blisters it right up. And it comes off soft, and when it gets cold, it's hard and crinkly.
Most important, however you are removing the paint, put a drop cloth on the floor so that the dust and dirt and pieces of paint fall onto the drop cloth and be collected and can be removed safely. Then once you've cleaned up that, you have to remove all the dust that's still on surfaces. Just get a household cleanser and scrub the floor the way you ordinarily would for dirt, because that dust, which can linger for years, can be a lead hazard to children who play on the floor later on.
Experts agree that for any big paint removal jobs, you should use a highly trained contractor. But in many cases, they are hard to find, and They can be very expensive.
Probably the single most important thing for the federal government to be doing at this time is establishing standards and training courses for the lead paint abatement industry. Right now, only 2 states have any significant training programs underway, Massachusetts and Maryland. If you have the misfortune of living practically anywhere else in the country, you're almost on your own.
I can't afford to go out and spend $80,000 or $50,000 or whatever just to have it cleaned up or taken out and removed and redone.
By the time we're done with the driveway paving and have planted ground cover over the dirt that we're replacing, it'll cost us between $4,000 or $5,000, and that's with the fact that my father-in-law and my husband did the vast majority of the labor. I don't know what people would do if they didn't have the financial resources that we had. Not that it's been easy or that we would have chosen to spend our money this way, but we had the money.
Fact. The cost of removing lead from millions of homes considered high risk could be as much as $20 billion. Fact. The federal government has failed to solve the most serious lead problem, the removal of old lead paint from homes.
What we need is public support for legislation, regulations, and consumer actions to protect children from lead.
I think that the citizens should press their local health office, should press the state and press the federal public health authorities into programs, into action.
It is the responsibility of all pediatricians, all healthcare providers to move lead up far to the top of the health agenda in the United States if any of us are going to protect America's future.
I'm angry about it now because I know that there's people in the government knows all about the lead in homes, and they don't educate people.
My kids are hurt now, I'm hurt. You know, my whole family's hurt. We just, we bought a house a year ago, a dream house, nice yard, nice house, nice neighborhood and everything. And now all of a sudden, it's gone.
She's this little kid. You just look at her and you don't want to say, she can't see well, or she can't think right, or she can't do things just because of something that people just were not paying attention to or don't want to deal with the problem.
Lead poisoning is a disease that's entirely preventable. So, the most important thing for any of us to do as parents is to have our kids tested and retested if necessary. If your child's levels are low, you don't have to worry. But if they're high, you have to search out the sources of lead in your child's world. It's up to us. With early testing, we can begin to get rid of the problem.
One of the places that is beginning to get rid of the lead problem in the Twin Cities is the Lead Clinic. Based at the Hennepin County Medical Center in downtown Minneapolis, the clinic has been treating children with high blood lead levels for the past year and a half. I visited there last week.
You give them on fives? All right.
Cowabunga, dude. 19-month-old Dallas McVeigh is a friendly, curious toddler, normal and healthy by all outward appearances. But Dallas's life is imperiled by dangerously high levels of lead. A routine blood test revealed levels high enough to affect his intelligence, his health, his future.
All right, Mom.
How are you? You coming to say hi?
Fortunately for this child, the danger is dropping. For the past 6 months, his mother has brought him to the lead clinic at the Hennepin County Medical Center.
Because we caught it so early, there were no symptoms, and so we were able to treat it before it could start to really, before it could really affect any kind of development. He's had x-rays. There is no lead buildup either in the abdomen or the brain. I was concerned that it was going to affect his development, both mental and physical. I've been real concerned of simply where he got it, and that it's going to happen again, because if it was not in the house, it may potentially happen again, even though we've done all this work in the house.
It's the McVeigh house in South Minneapolis that's believed to be the source of Dallas's contamination. Much of it was covered with lead-based paint.
What all has been involved in getting the home so that it's as safe as you can make it?
We've had to scrape and scrub everything thoroughly and then paint. Window wells, we wound up removing one of them and replacing it, and then the rest of them have just been scraped and scrubbed and repainted.
Big helper.
On a daily basis, Kathy McVeigh dusts, scrubs, and vacuums her house. Even the slightest amount of lead dust could increase the poison Dallas could ingest. So far, Kathy and her 2 older children have not had a dangerous elevation of lead, but they are monitored periodically, and Dallas will be checked every 3 months for years. Right now, he's on his 2nd course of oral medication.
It's very bitter, but when you open up the capsule, you can put it into chocolate syrup, and he likes his medicine.
Kathy McVeigh is relieved that Dallas's exposure was detected and that it's being aggressively treated, but that's not all she feels.
Are you angry about this?
Very.
Who's that anger directed at?
In part, the city, the county, the state. There's all kinds of funding available for rental housing. If you own a house and you're going to rent it out, you can get funds like crazy to get rid of lead. But owner-occupied dwelling, there is nothing available. They tell you, you're on your own.
Well, here to help answer Kathy McVeigh's concern and your questions about lead poisoning are Bill George. He's an industrial hygienist with Twin Cities Testing, a private company specializing in a variety of tests of homes and businesses, including lead. Dr. Ernest Stremski is a pediatrician who works at the Lead Clinic and the Poison Control Center at Hennepin County. And State Representative Karen Clark of South Minneapolis, who's sponsoring legislation on lead poisoning before the coming session of the legislature. Representative Clark, we heard Kathy McVeigh say there's just not enough money to help. What are you proposing that could help fund some of this abatement situations?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because a lot of the problem is a matter of the public will to fund the kinds of cleanup that needs to occur, to do the type of screening of children and families that needs to occur. And what we are proposing is a bill that would put dollars into the Minnesota Department of Health and into the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and the Health Department to deal with more screening, assisting families to get their children screened, and requiring registration or actually licensing of lead abatement contractors, so they're doing the cleaning up in an appropriate way. And we'd be putting money into the Housing Finance Agency to help families deal with the problem of paying for very expensive lead abatement. We have also another approach that I think really makes this work, and that is to create jobs for people's neighborhood who really are having this problem. It's going to cost a lot of money, and what we want to do is to put a tax on the 2 historic sources of the problem, or a fee maybe in some cases, and that's the paint companies and the petroleum companies.
So if I'd buy a bucket of paint, it might have an extra couple of cents involved that would go to this?
Maybe an extra 10 or 25 cents, correct. It would be targeted to this cleanup problem.
When you talk about money, how much money would be involved?
Well, this is an educational development that we are doing with legislators. I mean, legislators have been learning in the last 5 years, I guess I would say, about how serious lead poisoning of children is, that it is the #1 environmental health problem of children in our state and in our nation. And so we've had to educate them about that, and I think we're going to start out with just a first step maybe of $4 or $5 million. But it's a multi-million-dollar problem eventually.
I've been told that our house is painted with lead. I have young children, and I thought that maybe there was somebody I could call up who would come out, somebody like Lynn Bada, who would come out and tell me if I had a problem. But that's not really the case.
Unfortunately, we just do not have the financial resources to reach out to every resident in the city.
Now, if my kids show up with they're poisoned, then we can get help. But up to that, so then we turn to someone like Bill George from Twin Cities Testing. What can you do for me if I think my house has been painted with lead paint? I want to know if there's a danger.
Well, there's a couple different things you can do. One is you could take a paint chip sample and send it into a laboratory for testing for lead.
About how much is that?
Those normally run between $30 to $50, depending on several factors.
He brought some gizmos with us.
Or another easier method, instead of having the residential person collect the samples, you can use TCT or any laboratory can provide a instrument like this with a technician who's qualified to test the paint while it's in place. And this instrument can test for lead-based products within the home without actually collecting samples.
So if somebody comes out and uses some of this equipment, how much might that cost a homeowner?
Well, for maybe sampling 20 locations, it would cost approximately $200 to $350 to sample maybe 20 samples of various paints within the residential structure.
And then a person is, a homeowner is on their own at that point, or a citizen rather. You don't necessarily have to be a homeowner. You're on your own at that point. I mean,
that's correct.
That's not
and there are resources, or there are people available to help interpret what those results may mean.
We have a caller joining us, Anne from Edina. Good evening, Anne. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. We just moved into an older home in Edina a couple of months ago, and I am pregnant, and I also have a 2-year-old child, and suddenly I'm very concerned about the potential of lead poisoning. And I guess my question is directed to the physician. Are there symptoms that I can watch for in my child already, just having been here 2 months, that I should be concerned about? What are the symptoms, if you can tell me that?
Well, primarily most children who are lead intoxicated don't have symptoms that you're going to be able to see. Children who've been exposed over a long period of time to lead, who absorb significant amounts of lead, initially will start having some gastrointestinal problems. Upset stomachs. They won't eat. They may not gain weight properly. They'll be constipated. They'll have crampy, persistent abdominal pain. If the lead exposure and absorption were to continue, then they would go on to develop a number of neurologic problems, or they would be lethargic, tired, sleepy, irritable, headaches.
But as any parent knows, some of the things you're discussing is just the normal repertoire. I mean,
exactly. And the danger here with lead intoxication is that levels that are medically adverse, the child is not going to show you any symptoms. So in your case, where you're living in a home which probably has lead-contaminated paint, you certainly need to have your child checked.
So the first step would be her pediatrician, I'm assuming,
right,
for any of us. And we go in and we say, I have a house, I think we might have lead paint. Will you check? And then what do they do?
Exactly. In that case, we would identify that person as being a high-risk individual, or they've been found to be living in a lead-contaminated environment. And for that person, we should do a true blood lead level as opposed to a screening test. There's a screening test which can be done by a finger poke, but it's not sensitive enough to pick up blood lead levels that we'd be worried about, 10 to 25 micrograms per deciliter. So
we have a caller, Natalie, who I believe has a question that kind of feeds right into this. Good evening, Natalie.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Shoot. Natalie?
Yes.
What's your question?
I'm wondering if my daughter was tested for lead and came out at 11 with a finger poke, and I'm wondering if she should be retested in the vein, or if her lead level was 11, if it should be retested now, because it might be higher in the vein, or how does that?
Dr. Stremski?
Most finger stick testing for lead estimates higher than what the venous or the arm poke would be. So I would say in your case where her level is 11, that's probably okay. But what we really need to know in her is what are her sources of lead? Are you living in a lead-contaminated environment? And if you find that you definitely are living in a home that has lead-contaminated paint, then her levels should be serially followed. I don't think that at this point right now today she needs to have that venous blood lead level drawn, but she's at risk and she should be continually followed.
Let's explain right now why it's children that we are so concerned about. Why is this more of a problem for little kids than it is for grown-ups?
Mostly for children, what we've seen, what research has shown us, is that children absorb more lead than the adult does. That may be related to diet. High-fat diets, you will absorb more lead. Diets which are deficient in calcium or iron, which are what we call divalent ions, similar to lead. Similar to lead. If you're deficient in the ions that you need, then you'll absorb more lead. So it might be related to dietary factors. The other problem is that lead more easily crosses into the brain in children than it does into adults. Plus, the child's brain is a developing brain opposed to an adult's where fully
they're
developed.
not developing anymore. In some cases more than others. We have another caller joining us, Nancy. Good evening, Nancy.
Yes, I was wondering if there could be any correlation between lead poisoning in adults and Alzheimer's disease. I live in South Minneapolis. Both my parents have died from Alzheimer's, and I'm now living in this house, and it's quite a concern for me.
Anybody want to?
I think we don't know.
I'm not aware of that. I know that Alzheimer's disease has tried to been linked to aluminum, but not so much to lead. So I don't know if I can answer that question.
As long as we're talking with you, Doctor, we saw in the tape the little boy taking medicine out of a capsule. It's called KeyMed?
Correct.
Now, this is something new. It used to be when kids had a really high blood lead elevation, they had to be hospitalized. Is this progress that it's going to be less expensive to treat kids, presumably in an oral medication rather than in the hospital?
Well, yes, using this medication will be less expensive than hospitalizing them. This medication was released by the FDA in March of 1991 for children with high blood lead levels or blood lead levels greater than 45. These children who had levels greater than 45 typically were being admitted to the hospital for intravenous chelation. Now this drug was released for oral chelation. Our interest at Hennepin County is looking at children whose levels are less than 45, specifically 25 to 40, and using this medication KeyMed to see if it would be of benefit in lowering the child's blood lead levels. And with Dallas McFay, his blood lead level was 40, so he was in this trial that we were using the KeyMed.
We have a call for Representative Karen Clark. I believe it's Therese. Good evening, Therese.
Hello?
It's your turn. Do you have a question?
Okay. I'm a daycare provider in North Minneapolis, and I am really afraid. We have, no money here. Can we paint? What happens if we have it? Can we sell? Can we move out? Can we, just sell and get out of here? I mean, we're really concerned about this. If you have no money to do absolutely nothing to your home, and you don't know what the previous owners have done, and can you just sell and, go home or start renting someplace, just to get yourself out of the situation?
When I first saw this documentary and started doing the research into this, I sort of panicked. But the people here have calmed me to an extent in that just because you have lead paint in your home, and so many homes do, that does not automatically mean that your children are going to have lead poisoning.
That's correct.
Why are some houses more at risk than others? You mentioned your own son, Lynn Bada. You have lead-based paint. You live near the freeway, and yet you checked him, and he got mad at you when you stuck him. But he's fine.
His levels are not measurable at all. And I think again, a big key is nutrition. My son loves to play in water, and he can play in the water as much as he wants to because two reasons: it keeps his hands out of his mouth, and it keeps his hands clean. I think that keeping a house clean by damp mopping and wet dusting will minimize a lot of the dust that children tend to pick up with their little wet fingers, and then putting toys and hands back in their mouth, they tend to begin to ingest the lead.
And so if you have lead-based paint, but it's not cracked or chipping or anything,
it shouldn't pose a hazard.
It shouldn't pose a hazard.
No, it's the stuff that's blistering or cracking or chipping away.
And if you go to take it off, that's where you can turn it into a problem.
Right. And we've moved in that direction with state legislation too. We've tried to make it clear that we're not talking necessarily about removing all lead paint. Lead dust is one of the major sources of contamination and poisoning for children, and it can come from paint, it can come from soil tracked in from outside. Having those children in that daycare center take their shoes off when they come in the house might be a big step towards reducing the lead contamination in the house. Having them wash their hands frequently might be
I think it's very unfortunate. She sounds really frightened, and that there's not a source where somebody can come out and say, yes, it's lead-based paint, but it's not a problem, or yes, it's lead-based paint, and it is a problem, that there's no way to find this out.
One of the ways you can find out is by testing the children, which is, in a way, unfortunate that we use our children to find out where the hazards are. I think that another area outside of the taking off the shoes would be to open up your windows. Of course, not in this weather, but as soon as it gets warm, check that window track area. Are there little pieces of flaking paint that have fallen into that window track? Is it very dusty? Children love to play at windows. It's one of their favorite hangouts, and it's one of the most dangerous hangouts they have.
We have another call this evening from Amy. Good evening, Amy.
Hi. I'm wondering, I have a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and about a year ago, my son was complaining a lot about stomach aches and headaches, and just from watching the program, for sure, I'm going to take him in to get his blood level tested. But I'm wondering, my landlord lives out of town, and I'm wondering what will the recourse be if if they find that the paint is lead-based, or what can I do to get it tested? Because there is some paint that's chipping around the windowsills, and I notice in the bathroom the plaster is coming off the ceiling. So I'm wondering what would be the, what I would do, and how they would force the landlord to get it cleaned up, or what I can do from that.
In St. Paul, there's a couple things. And again, because unless the children actually have elevated blood leads, we really don't have the resources, the financial resources to get into the home to test. You can talk to your landlord. If there is areas in the house that are not being maintained, where you have ceiling falling in, those can be called in to the Housing Code Enforcement Office as a complaint, and an officer will come out, take a look at the house, and issue some orders to the landlord. Just because it may or may not contain lead-based paint, it poses a hazard, living condition.
Since a lot of the regulatory agencies do not, give free services for the average residential person, contract laboratories throughout the cities do offer both X-ray fluorescence testing and paint chip analysis. And if you have a certain uniform paint throughout the structure, it may be very cost effective to send one sample in for analysis, although it's only going to tell you what that one paint is like.
They're very much interested from people. Do you see a lot of people who are calling and want some sort of testing or verification?
We get several calls every day.
Oh, really?
And we do, usually for the public housing institutions, we do a lot of testing for. We do probably get at least 1 or 2 calls per day for going out with the direct reading instrument and trying to sample several locations. The XRF testing is by far the most economical to give you the most punch for your dollar.
Well, Kathy from St. Louis Park is on the line now, another caller with a question. Good evening, Kathy. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
I had my daughter tested recently for lead, and her level was 22, but my pediatrician told me that was a normal level and nothing to be concerned about.
There's shutters here.
Your show earlier seemed to say that 10 was the safe level, and my question is that a level I should be concerned about?
And should she get a new pediatrician?
Well, the new recommendations by the Center for Disease Control is that a level of 10 should be considered where interventions start. So definitely in your case, where your daughter has a level of 22, you need to find out where that source is coming from, and it probably is lead-contaminated paint.
How well are members of your profession schooled into changes and all this? I mean, are they up to date? Do they know?
Well,
are they pursuing this as aggressively as they should?
I think this is a hot topic and is being pursued more and more aggressively, and more pediatricians are being aware that levels which were considered medically non-adverse are in fact medically adverse. If you look back in the 1960s, a blood lead level of 60 was considered okay. In the 1970s, it was 40. In the 1980s, it's 25. And now here we are in 1991, and that level's been dropped to 10. So for the caller whose daughter, her level is 22, is she going to have any symptoms acutely from it today? Probably not. But she is at risk of developing problems if she is allowed to persist at that blood lead level of 22. And that, in her case, what needs to be done is the source or sources need to be identified and eliminated. I don't think that she would be a patient who would be a candidate for any kind of chelation therapy to augment the lowering of her blood lead level.
Again, this idea that perhaps, I think this caller lived in a suburb, that maybe suburban pediatricians think it's more an inner city problem. Does that happen?
I think that's common, but I think also the fact that as physicians, we think in terms of normal and abnormal. Mm-hmm. And up until October 7th of this year, a normal level was considered anything under 25. Mm-hmm. And so for her pediatrician to say that 22 is normal, I'm not surprised by that, except that now that isn't considered a normal.
We have another call from Mickey. Good evening, Mickey.
Hi. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, how old of a house do you have to have before it's safe with no lead paint, no lead pipe? And also, how long, if you have the lead in your system, how long is it in there before it finally leaves? or what, you know?
Well,
That was,
housing constructed prior to the mid-1970s should be anticipated to have at least some lead-based paint. The farther you go back in the years to the 1950s and prior to that, you can probably assume that most of your paint is lead-based paint. One recommendation that anytime you have any flaking paint, don't try to use methods that do not raise any additional dust. Don't use regular vacuum cleaners. Use wet wipe methods, wet mop methods. Your vacuum cleaners will just reintroduce the dust back into the air in the house and probably a finer particulate, so you may become more at risk.
I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. You've certainly shed a lot of information on this topic, and it's a topic that needs the light to be shed upon it. So thank you very much. A lot of questions raised and a lot of concern shown, but hopefully we'll all continue to pursue it, and we want to tell our viewers about that. If you do have additional questions about children and lead poisoning, we have some phone numbers that you can call. Now, you can call the Poison Control Center, and there are 3 numbers. If you live in Ramsey County or the East Metro area, call 221-2133. If you live in Hennepin County or the West Metro area, the number is 347-3141. And if you live outside the metro area, the toll-free number is 1-800-222-1222. Now, that may be a first call that you can make to begin to get the ball rolling to get some more information. Next week on KTCA Reports, we'll take a trip back 150 years. Our program will look at how a bend in the Mississippi River called Pig's Eye became a city we know as St. Paul. We'll feature some little-known chapters in the city's past, including rare film footage from 1917. That's St. Paul's Past, next Tuesday night at 9 o'clock here on KTCA Reports. That's our program for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kevyn Berger. Good night.
Major funding for this edition of KTCA Reports is provided by the McKnight Foundation, responding to the needs of individuals and communities. Additional funding is provided by Ryder, Bennett, Egan, and Arundel, providing timely, aggressive, and cost-effective legal services.